this first topic. Our first topic is what is true digital leadership. We have Prantik Mazumdar, we have Fady Daher, and we have Felicity Blake. Hello there, all three of you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Clive.
Good afternoon.
Brilliant. Well, look, what I'm going to do first is invite you just to kind of introduce yourselves and which organisation you're with and what you do there. But also, I suppose, to ask you just to reflect on what we saw in that poll, the fact that when we asked people, what's foremost on your mind of what your organisation's facing, well over half of people said they want to instill that strong digital culture within their organisations. So Prantik, I'm going to pick on you first. If you could just let us know, for those of us who haven't met you, where you work, what you do, and then what's your reflection on that?
Sure. Lovely meeting all of you. Yeah, so just in terms of introduction, I run a company called Happy Marketer, which was acquired by dentsu. So hence you see my title there as dentsu. So my company was acquired a couple of years ago. We're an earn-out. And yeah, it's been a fascinating journey with with the conglomerate called dentsu. And so, in terms of my role, so dentsu currently is structured into three business lines, if you will. Has three business lines, if you will. And so there's a creative business line, there is a media business line, and there is what's called the CXM, the Customer Experience Management Group. So I lead the CXM line of business for Singapore, which has three brands, including Happy Marketer. And in terms of priorities, I think from the list that you had, I voted for strategic partnerships. So for us in dentsu, for the CXM line of business, which is led primarily by a brand called Merkle from the US. For us, partnerships with partners like Google, Salesforce, Adobe is massive. A lot of our growth in the region is coming from strategic old school partners like them. When I say old school, these are modern companies, but our partnerships have been around for maybe more than a decade. But also with some new strategic partners with new age startups like Insider, MoEngage, so on and so forth. So I think partnerships are a huge part of our growth, our learning, and our go-to-market strategy. Mm-hmm. In terms of the other one, which I think most people voted for, and I can totally see why, is I think upskilling and training and learning. Especially as we are in Singapore, at least we're just about coming back to the physical offices on a 50 to 75% basis. Just managing the workforce, getting that camaraderie going and learning. So to me, partnerships, upskilling, that's where my head is at.
Brilliant. Thanks for that intro, Prantik. Good to know what your view on that is. Next guest I'd like to introduce is Fady Daher of Till Payments. Good morning, Fady.
Well, it's good evening for me.
Afternoon, rather. Different time zones, different places in the world. Good afternoon.
Yep, good afternoon. Hello all from Sydney. And just to give you a bit of a brief background and an understanding of what I do, I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Till Payments, so a fast-growing fintech with 60 plus people now working in our organisation. And we have a global footprint. We are known for our omni-channel experience that we create on the payments front. And what that means is whether it's in-store, online, mobile, it allows you to centralise the payment experience so that it's that single screen view for a merchant and to bring it all into one. And there's an increasing demand for that. The larger the merchant, the more of that need arises. And then from an acquiring, whilst we have a global footprint, from an acquiring perspective, we have our license in Australia, New Zealand with the schemes, and currently finalising it across Europe and the UK with the intent to then follow suit with the US. But that's who we are. In terms of the question that you posed, I did tick that point, the question, but in saying that, whilst that digital culture is absolutely critical, not just for us, but many organisations that we work with, I think forging partnerships was a close second because as you have an increasing amount of new niche partners and players in the digital space, you just find that the importance of knowing who to work with and scaling your business is just reliant on those partnerships. And so, that then is dependent on trust that's forged on the back of it. And a lot of these organisations are relatively new as well. So you're trying to establish in a fairly rapid period of time too.
Right, thanks for that, Fady. Like Prantik, you're really viewing that partnerships thing as fundamentally important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our third guest for our initial panel is Felicity Blake, Felicity of FIS. Hello, Felicity.
Hi, Clive. I'm the country manager for FIS here in New Zealand, so it's also evening for me. Good evening to you, Fady. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone else. So FIS is the largest banking and payments technology provider globally. We've got a large workforce. I think it's getting up to close to around 70,000. But there's just one of me in my special field here in New Zealand. We work with all of the banks and the financial institutions, as well as we have specialists in merchant and online offerings as well. In terms of the poll, guess what? 3 out of 3, I'm going with strategic partnerships as well. For us, we are seeing that the banks who are our clients are looking for that scale of thinking that you can get through partnerships with people who are specialists in their own fields. So we're seeing things like banks are talking with us, we're the specialists in the payments technology. They need a cloud provider, so it might be Microsoft Azure or Google or AWS or some of the others coming up, and even consulting firms to help them think through all of the different mechanisms that they need to get from A to B in that digital transformation journey. And everybody brings their own critical thinking to that storytelling.
Brilliant. So already this is interesting already, and I promise everyone this wasn't set up. Our 3 invited guests have all broken free from that poll and said, no, they're highlighting strategic partnerships as being the way forward. Already interesting. I'm going to kick off just with a general question. A general question is, we talk a lot about leadership. Most of us probably acknowledge that leadership has changed in the last couple of decades. So if we're talking about being a digital leader, what does it take really to be a digital leader? What's your vision of what true digital leadership actually is? Prantik, let's start again with you on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think a fundamental change in mindset that I've seen in the last couple of decades is, I think essentially there is a change in mindset that digital leaders or leaders of this generation are, essentially encouraging a growth mindset. I think more and more I'm seeing people who are leading by example, yet they're happy to be at the back end. They're happy to celebrate success. They're happy to enable people, but they are at the back end. They're not necessarily always gunning for the limelight. So I think I'm seeing a change in terms of a lot of enablement. It's not about just the leader, your classical scene where the leader's kind of the head of the pack and driving the rest of them to kind of follow suit. I think there's a lot of flexibility in his or her style. There's a lot of enablement through tools and technology. There's a lot of consensus building that I'm seeing, as opposed to literally what your classical hippo model where the highest individual paid person's opinion mattered the most. I think there's a lot of encouragement of using data to kind of make informed decisions, to at least drive a culture where people use data to have discussions, have debates, they deliberate, and then they kind of decide and act upon things. So I think that's the style that I've been observing, and technology and digital is just kind of enabling and fueling that change. Because today, you could be sitting wherever, but if you have that mindset, if you have that tools and technology, you could kind of foster that spirit of forward thinking and growth mindset.
Sure. Okay. So leading from the back, building consensus, things like that, you feel are key. Felicity, what's your view on what it takes to be a digital leader in this day and age?
So I'm taking my view from that digital transformation perspective, because I think that that's where a lot of businesses are. I think you have to start with the customer. So where does digital fit into that whole omni-channel experience that we're all looking for? And to drive that transformation requires leadership in every direction. So it's not just as you would traditionally think of your team. Yes, you have to drive down to your team, but you also have to drive out to your peers and up to the board or the executive, depending on where in the business you are. So from the team perspective, you need to inspire them with creative thinking and try to unlock that set behaviour, to let go of the old way of doing things and bring them on the journey into the new world. And we've got some really great use case stories out of the last year. As you said, we've all lived and breathed a very different world in pandemic lockdowns. And so you can make the stories really personal for them. For the executives, the peers, you need to get their support and for them to cascade that support down to their teams. because business change for strategic goals takes time, and it also takes focus. And so from a business perspective, they have to buy into that. And what that means is making sure that anything that they need in the short term, while that big strategic goal is being driven forward, is minimal, is identified as a minimum viable product, which will be as light touch as possible as you drive towards that end goal, which is going to give them exactly what they want: pace and agility, and the storytelling around that is something like, you know, taking forward to the target state from 8 weeks of development and coding in the current world would drop down to something like an hour of configuration in the new world. And then, of course, the boards have to be brought along for the investment. Globally, I think there's less than 10% of boards have made up of technically savvy people. And this means that there's a gap in both the understanding of what it takes to upheave that journey into the new world, and also the risk and governance over that process. So you have to be really careful about calling out both the good and the bad, and making sure that the decision making can be made from a perspective where they've got all the information to really get behind it.
Right, so mirroring what Prantik said about data-driven decisions, but at the same time, very much making sure that you provide for your team, provide for your people the things they need to get on with that changing culture.
Yeah.
Fady, what's your take on this?
Yeah, look, I think there's been some very valid points. The first point I'd raise is there are trendsetters, right? The likes of Uber, Amazon, a lot of companies that are using technology to enable and improve customer experience are looking to these organizations, whether within the same industry or not, to understand best practice. And I think one of the reasons why you have these fast growing organizations that are surpassing some of the more traditional players out there is they're not having to replace the old. They're literally just starting from scratch and saying, what available information do I have today? What are some of the new trends, and what do I need to build to progress this and expedite the progression at the same time? So you get this accelerated growth, not having to worry about legacy systems or legacy processes that have been in place for many years. And then I think the technology, the point that was made by Prantik, which is valid, is it enables the acceleration of growth. It's not the reason for the growth, it's just an enabler. You still need to focus on the fundamentals when it comes to having that external focus, when it comes to truly understanding the customers or the industry verticals that you're playing in. And the deeper you go, the more you understand their own ecosystem, the more you can play in it, and the more you can actually create a seamless customer experience for them. So you're thinking about their customer and not your customer, if that makes sense.
Now, Fady, you make a fair point there that for so many organisations now who are setting up and getting established, this is not a novelty anymore. This is business as usual. You know, acting digitally, thinking in this agile way. But I suppose let's remember that among the community we're dealing with here, there are newer companies. There are also maybe more established companies where there is possibly legacy ways of working. There are more traditional attitudes. And I'm wondering, I'd like to ask the three of you, if you find yourself in that sort of setting, in that organisation, how do you go about upskilling people, helping people to embrace a new way of working if you do find yourself facing that challenge? I want to start with Felicity, I think, on this one.
Yeah, so this is the challenge of bringing people along the journey with you, and because change is hard, and often in these businesses where there are legacy systems, people might have been working on those systems for decades. You know, they know what they know, and they're experts in that field, and change is scary for them. So again, it's bringing that storytelling in and making it personal to them. That experience that they've had of having to do everything digitally for the last year at various times during lockdowns, and you know, hearing the stories from people in different parts of the world, how challenging it is for everything, working, socializing, you know, getting on with doing your banking, your shopping, all of the things that we need to do. And then it brings into reality the changes that need to be done at the core. So yes, at the start of the pandemic, everything was very quickly changed into that digital world. I think digital adoption achieved in about 3 months what it had been on a trajectory of 3 to 5 years to achieve. So pretty amazing at the front end, sticky tape and blue tack at the back end to make it happen. So it's time to get in under the covers and deal with that and make something really transformative for the business to drive forward into the future. And if you can get them to bring their heart to that transformation, you've got a really magic train to drive through.
Felicity, you mentioned there obviously the huge challenge that we've all been dealing with for the last year, the pandemic. But I just wanted to check something. This idea that we need to help our colleagues who are maybe more used to traditional ways of working, we need to help them along in this new digital mindset. Are you suggesting there that for all its difficulties and all its pain, that the last year of changed ways of working has almost helped us catch up, almost helped us make progress with that cultural thing?
Yeah, it absolutely has, because people have had to adapt and change very quickly. And there was so much uncertainty and fear that they've dipped a toe into, and then how do you say, dived right in? Dipped a toe in and then dived right into that challenge. And they've come out with a better understanding of the changes that do need to happen.
Right, I get you, yeah. I've got a load of questions here, but everyone else, do feel free to chip it in the chat because we'd love to hear what you think. Prantik, I'm going to turn to you now. What are your thoughts there on what Felicity's just offered us?
Yep, absolutely. Very, very fair points. I agree that I think last year a lot of expectations were reset. So the couple of points that I want to make in terms of cultural changes through learning, I'll give you a couple of examples. So we've been working with a very large family-owned conglomerate in the Philippines. In most of Southeast Asia, in most countries, there are probably a handful of family-owned enterprises that pretty much run the entire the business economy in these countries. So, I've seen change being driven at both levels, top-down and bottom-down. So in this particular organization, from the top-down perspective, they had a bunch of global consultants come in. They set up a centralized, a digital transformation office. As part of that, there was upskilling, external trainers, yada, yada, yada. So there was a whole top-down process to drive and understand and audit, to begin with audit as to where do we lack, what capabilities do we need, what kind of trainers do we need, so on and so forth. But that was encouraging enough to begin with, but what was really heartening to see is the change that was groundswell, that was happening bottoms up. So there are so many interesting digital learning platforms today. I'm not even talking about the Coursera's of the world, right? I'm talking about, for example, in the region, there's a learning platform called Tigerhorn, right? It's a subscription-based platform where individuals, employees themselves can just sign up and pay, on a pay-per-use basis or a subscription basis. And these things spread. If I'm using something, if I like something, I post about it, and word spreads. So what was beautiful was this amalgamation where learning was happening in a structured format, top-down, but I think it met somewhere in the middle where it was happening bottom-up, and all thanks to SaaS business models, digital learning platforms, technology, which makes things accessible and relatively cost-effective. So to me, last year, I saw a lot of this happening, which otherwise, to be honest, there wasn't much of an impetus for this to happen. So that was very heartening for me. And I think I would like to believe that this is here to stay. It's a great movement.
So you're suggesting both are needed there, Prantik, the leadership, the top-down, if you like, and that maybe technology-enabled bottom-up idea, that they both need to work together.
Absolutely. I mean, if I had to pick one, I would still go for bottom-up because, today people know what they want. They know the choices available, and they're making informed choices for themselves and their teams. I love that sort of, because the buy-in is there automatically. If something's only top-down, it's like, oh, I got to do it because my boss said, asked me to do it, right? Sure. So the buy-in isn't really natural. So to me, I'm always in favor of anything that's, that happens naturally and organically bottom-up. But surely, I think especially from a large organization, since you mentioned that, I think it has to be both ways, top down and bottom up.
Cool. Fady, what's your view, particularly on the idea of working with colleagues who maybe just need that little empowerment or encouragement to bring to new ways of working?
Yeah, it goes back to the comment around culture. So I think, making sure you've got the right people in the team and in the organisation with the right attitude is where it starts. So if someone doesn't have the right attitude, no matter how experienced or seasoned or regardless of their credentials, it's very difficult to take them on the journey. So I think it's very important you take people on the journey with you, but they have to want to, jump on the train in effect. And so you can't force someone to do that. And so I think that's where it can be a real struggle when you're trying to, bring someone along your new, a changing path, but they're not willing to enjoy that ride. And I think when you look at the attributes of a strong team, you can definitely see diversity as being the foundational component of that. And so when you think about, knowledge is definitely power, and there's so many moving parts. So I think when we hear about, the younger generation coming through and what they're learning, their case studies when they're studying today are more around fintechs rather than your traditional brands. And so even their case studies at university have changed and evolved. But at the same time, how do you bridge with the new with the old? How do you ensure those that have the knowledge, but more importantly, those that understand the context, right, and why we are where we are today, can contribute to the conversation? So you have to have this balance. And so we see that within our organisation. Every Monday morning, we spend the week going through training so that anything that's new, we pick a topic that's based on the feedback of the team, and then we bring the seasoned experts or the subject matter experts to share their knowledge and what they understand of the topic with the broader team. And if we have to, we'll bring an external speaker. But there's enough diversity now within the organisation as we've grown, whether we're coming in from a tech perspective, a scheme point of view, or where they're coming from just a general payments ecosystem perspective. We're able to share that knowledge with each other. So it's so important that we share the information around in a rapid period of time, so that we're not, and I think that's how you take people on the journey with you. So you're not having, in the past, you may have had training probably every few months. Now you do it weekly. And that's how fast the pace is.
I really like that point you made, Fady, that among colleagues, we may feel the need to kind of help along the journey. We mustn't fall into a trap of not valuing their skills, their experience, as you mentioned, their understanding of the contexts in which we work. So treating them respectfully and as equals, as work on this as a team, that does sound valuable. A question has just been pitched in here by Jack Downing. Jack's asking, what does it mean to you in your company to develop a culture of digital agility and experimentation? So 2 words there that crop up in a lot of the conversations we have here as a DLF community: agility and experimentation. That they're great words, they're very appealing, but as leaders, what does it mean to actually try and make those things happen, agility and experimentation? Now, Fady, I know we've just been speaking to you, but I think it's your turn to answer a question first. So I'm gonna pick on you in quick succession. What's your take on that, Fady? Agility, experimentation.
It's they are common words, and I'd start with the latter. So experimentation. I'll be a bit cliche here, but it's so relevant here. We've heard about growth mindset on a regular basis. We've heard the saying fail and fail fast on a regular basis. But they're absolutely critical in the process, because you need to be able to make multiple iterations as quickly as possible in order to evolve and in order to keep up with what's happening around you. So I think the power of experimentation will always be at the forefront of innovation. And then backing that up with digital agility, they kind of go hand in hand, right? So the ability to change and adapt. And this is what I mean, this is what I was talking about earlier. It's not so much about the people from the larger organizations, it's what they're stuck with. So they're stuck with technology and those legacy systems and processes. And having come from a large multinational after many years, I'm very familiar with how hard it is to change and how slow it is to change. All right, you have so many layers of approval, and that just slows you down. It becomes very frustrating for seasoned, knowledgeable individuals within the company, and you start to see this migration from your traditional players to these newly emerging, fast-growing fintechs that are just starting to really have an impact. And if you just look at companies that are listing on the ASX or globally with other organizations, they're just moving at such a rapid pace because they're building it from the ground up in such a powerful way. And then they very carefully pick who they partner with. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to strategic partnerships. being able to forge those allows them to accelerate even further.
Sure.
But they're partnering with companies that think the same way.
Okay. Felicity, when you hear the words experimentation, agility, from a leadership perspective, how do you make those things happen?
Well, I think that digital agility is actually the perfect basis for experimentation. And so I talked before about delivering at speed is where we want to get to, right? And actually not just at speed, delivering segmented offerings and solutions which are personalized at speed. And I couldn't agree more with Fady. The culture that sits alongside this has to be one of growth mindset. So growth mindset has its basis in experimentation and learning. And in that concept, there's no negativity associated with failure. It's really just part of the journey of growing and getting to a better place. So, you know, the agile ways of working are fabulous because that has that concept as well. We'll go down that, we'll have a small a sliver, define what we're trying to do. We'll go down that path. If that doesn't work, back up the track, fail fast, and refocus, and off you go again. So yeah, I think it's if we're given the freedom to fail and fail fast, the opportunities to really stretch and extend that creativity to innovation naturally follow. Okay.
Prantik, experimentation, agility, what's your view?
Yeah, the way we kind of try and instill or kind of practice this within our organization, I'll start with experimentation. I think every month when we have our feedback sessions with our peers or superiors or subordinates, I think the question we always try and ask is, okay, what's the biggest risk you took this month? And I think it's important because the more that becomes part of your regular conversation, your peers, your employees, your colleagues, they suddenly know that, hey, it's okay to talk about, like Felicity was saying, failure or risks, or that's what experimentation is all about. So I think just having conversations about what risks have you taken or do you plan to take, I think just makes it gradually okay. The other, in terms of agility, I think there are two perspectives. I think one is, again, tying back to what both Fady and Felicity said, is about, in the whole digital world, digital leadership, we're talking about omni-channel customer experience. And one of the things that, whether it's B2B, B2C, what customers expect is agility, not, in terms of response, in terms of customer experience. So to me, the whole notion of omni-channel CX is very much built around agility, and agility in terms of delivery and response. So that's, the response, I think, is something that we genuinely, measure, whether it's, it could be as simple as messages, emails, or it could be as, complicated as, in terms of any product development or project delivery, and, how are we tracking status? Are we being proactive versus being reactive? I think that's the way that we kind of track and talk about agility. The only point I would make is, I think one risk about agility is that you've got to still find that decent balance of agility yet accuracy, right? You can't just be agile but not delivering, or but not accurate. Again, depends on the context and the industry and the stage of the company. So I think it's important to kind of marry, or at least have conversations around agility as well as accuracy and effectiveness.
Sure. So I think a question we've just seen coming from Sid Daz really seems to be relevant there. Sid's asking, he says he's keen to understand, as business leaders, have the business metrics changed in the last year? Are there any new metrics your business is going to measure? Which possibly speaks to what we've just said. If we're measuring ourselves along traditional lines, if we're embracing these new ways of working, what are the metrics that we need to be thinking about to measure how well we're performing? Who wants to pick up that one first?
I can go.
Go for it, Prantik.
Yeah, that's a good one, Sid. Obviously, the core metrics, dentsu is a public listed company, so the core metrics, we're still looking at revenue, staff cost ratio, profitability, all of that, right? Your financial metrics. But I think what's really encouraging is that we're also looking at a couple of other elements. One is mental wellness, mental health, right? It's hard to measure, but that's definitely a topic of conversation. We're asking people for surveys, etc., right? So there's a lot more check-ins happening on that front, which is very, very encouraging. And to be honest, pre-COVID, I'd not seen that happen. It's definitely a very positive change. The other is within dentsu, there's there's a whole philosophy with, Wendy Clark coming in as our new global CEO. There's a huge movement around good for growth. And it's a virtuous cycle that, it's not about just checking a CSR checklist. It's about doing good, which will eventually lead, to good results, right? And, we've seen the P&Gs, Unilevers, the world do it, but it's good to see that even in our industry. So I won't go into details, but we have made some huge, there's some massive strides when it comes to electricity consumption. Even in Singapore, we've gone down from 4 floors to 1 floor. And one of the reasons was about, in terms of saving, of course, it has a financial benefit, good for growth, but also saving of electricity consumption, and preventing or kind of reducing travel expenses, travel consumption, so on and so forth. So I think the whole element of following what one would see at a Davos, the whole Davos agenda around health, wellness, mental safety, it's really encouraging to see that in the last 6 to 8 months, at least within the dentsu context, these are being talked about, and some of these are being made as your official KPIs for leaders in the organization.
I'm going to turn to Felicity now, and maybe just relatively briefly, Felicity, if you were going to say what are the new metrics that we should be using to measure this kind of success, what's your take?
I think Prantik's actually covered everything, but I'll just underline the importance of those environmental, social, governance metrics, because we see every organisation has to have policies and processes and commitment to those types of activities. It's very broad. It's much broader than just your carbon footprint. There's diversity and inclusion and doing good in the community, giving back, all of those sorts of things. I know from I don't like the word vendor, I prefer partner, but from a vendor perspective, it's in every single RF process.
Right. Okay.
You have to be able to speak to that.
And Fady, I'm going to turn to you now. What are your thoughts on the new metrics we should be using, just briefly to give us an insight from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the fundamental metrics don't change around profitability, revenue, and so forth. There is an increasing focus on social responsibility as well. And so thinking about the economic social responsibility organisations have, who they're engaging. So when we talk about partnerships, the companies you're partnering with, making sure they have equal responsibility as well in terms of how they treat their people, their staff, and so forth. So there's that broader expectation or responsibility that's just expected from investors or shareholders alike. And I think there's an element where you need to be quite intuitive. So when you're growing at a rapid pace, you need to be looking for those metrics that are quite relevant to the changes. So I'll give you an example. From a growth point of view, you traditionally would look at your sales channels to see where some of that growth is coming from. But something that I've noticed in recent times is the scale that takes place by partnering with the right organizations where they're helping you scale. So now you're aligning your principles. They're almost it's like white labeling your brand. So therefore you have to be so conscious of who you select and ensuring their principles and their measures are aligned at the same time. So it's just being aware of that. And that's where the relevance and the intuition comes into play.
I like that. I like the fact you flagged intuition there, that we sometimes get obsessed with measurement, don't we, and metrics, but sometimes actually going on values can be a big player there. Mm-hmm. It's very nearly time for us to move on. You've all three of you given us some fantastic insight to start off with, but I think I'm just going to finish by asking a question that I'd like maybe just a 1 or 2 word answer from each of you on. If I was going to ask you, what's the most important quality a digital leader needs to have in this day and age? Prantik, in 1 or 2 words, what's the most important leadership quality?
Curiosity and empathy.
Curiosity, empathy. Nice. Felicity?
I've got courage, commitment, and communication.
Ooh, she snuck in 3, but 3 very good ones. And Fady?
Passion and relevance.
Brilliant. What a fantastic spread. That just reflects, I think, the different perspectives we've had from all 3 of you. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Fady Daher from Till Payments, Felicity Blake of FIS, and Prantik Mazumdar from Dentsu International. I've really appreciated the insight you've brought to that. I hope everyone else has as well. I think as setting the scene for what we need to think about in digital leadership right now, that's been superbly valuable. So thank you all 3 of you.